Hi everyone. Today we are going to be taking one of the Daenerys shots from our dress shoot with the brand new white dress from season 5, and we are going to be adding some dragons to the shot, as you can see here, as well as integrating the dragons well with shadows and detail works, as well as motion blurs and grain. After that, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of light retouch and some color work. So let's get started here by opening our file. So this is how our shot started. And as you can see, we've got good capture of the details, but actually with this shot I really wanted to kind of blow it out, give it a bit of a fantasy light feeling, even blow out the sky, kind of combine it in with the sea, and make our model and the sand around her pretty much the only part of the image that was properly exposed. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and up our exposure, and as well as our contrast. We're going to also up our highlights and our shadows, but we're going to go ahead and down our whites. And we're going to go ahead and leave our blacks and our clarity exactly where they are. But we're going to move our vibrance and our saturation up. Alright, this way we've got a nice bright image, but we also have a bunch of color to work with in the image. So we're ready to open this. Now I've already picked out 3 stock images to use in this image for the dragons. There's actually a great stock artist on DeviantArt who is providing these dragons, and I'm going to go ahead and link you to them so you can go ahead and find some dragons you want for your images as well. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to add our dragons in, then also add the dragon's shadows in. And I'm going to show you guys how to add your dragons in and how to take those dragons and use them to create the shadows. Let's go ahead and pick our first dragon here. So we've got this white dragon, and we're going to go ahead and say Control A to select image, Control C to copy, then we're going to go back here to our image and we're going to say Control V. Now it's asking us if we want to convert our colors to the destination, and we're going to go ahead and say OK. So now we have our dragon in the shot, but we're going to need to resize him and decide where he's going to be facing. So we're going to go ahead and do Control T to transform, and then we're going to do right click and flip vertical. Oh, sorry, not vertical. We are flipping horizontal right now, and then vertical. So sorry about that. Now we have our dragon facing the right direction, and we are going to go ahead and resize it. And to do that, when you are using transform to resize an item, you want to hold shift down to lock it to its dimensions, and then you're going to drag this edge, and that way it won't warp your object. So now we've made him a bit smaller. I'm actually going to work and make him even smaller. So there we go. So now we have our first dragon in spot. I'm going to go ahead and say enter to complete the transformation. Don't forget to do that before you go and get your next object. So we're going to go ahead and get our next dragon. And our next dragon is this one. So I'm going to go ahead and click Control A, Control C, go back to our image and click Control V, say OK to the color change, and then do Control T to transform, and then we're going to hold shift down and make this a lot smaller. I'm going to have him walking right alongside her. Maybe even like shift the direction a little bit. we go. And then we're going to click enter. So that is our second dragon in spot. So now we're going to go ahead and get our third dragon. So our third dragon is this flying one. And we're just going to do the same thing. Control A, Control C, go to our image, Control V, okay, Control T, and I'm going to go ahead and swap the direction this dragon is facing. So we're going to go right click, flip horizontal, and we're going to move him up to this corner and then hold shift down and change his size. Position him right up there behind her. Okay, now I'm going to hit enter. And so now we have all three of our dragons in shot. Our next task is to create shadows for them. So to do that, we're going to click on our first dragon. Oh, by the way, let's actually name our dragons. So this first layer should be our white dragon. Double click and say white. Our second layer is our red dragon, so we'll double click that and say red. And our third is our green. We'll say green. That way we can keep track of our layers as we do work further along. So we're going to go ahead and click on our white layer, and we're going to drag it down here onto this new layer button and create white copy. Let's go ahead and do that with all three of our layers here. So we'll click on red, red copy, green, green copy. So now we've created a copy of each of these dragons. Let's go to the white copy. Now that we're in the white copy, let's go ahead and click Control T to transform, and then right click and say flip vertical. So now we've created this vertical flip of this dragon, and we're just going to say enter for now. So go ahead and click Control T, and then we're going to do skew, and then we're going to go ahead and just drag these edges, just kind of skew the shape. What we're doing is we're essentially creating a better shadow shape based on how the light is hitting in this image. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. So I just used the W. If you click the W tool and you hold it down and you click on your object, you can actually get it selected. It's the magic wand tool. So go ahead and do that. And once you have your whole dragon here selected, what you can do is you can go up and use this dropper tool, and we're just going to select a chunk of shadow. So now we have this chunk of shadow selected. We're going to go over here to our color picker. And we're going to go ahead, since we know that if we're going to have to down the opacity to make these shadows look realistic, we have to go ahead and pick a darker color to start with. So with that color picked, I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to get the brush tool. And with this one object selected, we're just going to go ahead and brush over the entire object. And it's in overlay. We want it to be normal. There we go. So now we've got this deep dark shadow pit there. We're going to go ahead and undo our selection, and then just down the opacity. And notice I need to move this a little closer to the hand. And I'm going to actually use my arrow keys to just very carefully move it over that way. So one other thing about this shadow I already noticed is that the color is a little off, if you can tell. This is a little bit more yellow and this is a little more blue tone. So we're gonna have we're going to have to go over here to Image, Adjustments, Selective Color on this layer. We're going to go to Blacks, and we're just going to down the yellows a little bit and maybe add a tiny bit of magenta. There we go. So that makes the shadow match up with the other one a little better, and that will help. So there's other things we're going to end up doing with these shadows, but let's go ahead and just do that for the other two dragons we have in this shot. So we're going to go ahead to our red copy now, and we're going to do Control T and flip vertical. Then we're going to manipulate the selection a little bit here. And then we're going to do skew. And let's just go ahead and kind of push that in there. And make that bigger. Make that bigger. There we go. So we'll say Enter. Then I'm going to use my quick select tool, so my W. So now I've got my dragon selected, and we're going to go ahead and do exactly what we did last time. One thing we want to quickly do though is take red copy over here in our layer section and move it under red. That way our shadow is going to be underneath our dragon. So we're going to go back over here to our brush. We still have our shadow selection color ready, and we're just going to brush over. Okay. Next, we take our opacity and we're going to down it to about there and click Enter. Now, just like we did with this one, we're going to go back up to Image, Adjustments, Selective Color, and we're going to redo the shadow color. So we're going to go to Blacks, just add a little touch of blue and a little touch of magenta to that shadow. Okay? So now we can unselect that. And what you might notice right now is there's a little bit of shadow overlap happening right here. And we're going to take care of that soon. So our last dragon that we have to add a shadow for is our green dragon here. And we're actually going to take green copy and move it all the way down to the bottom just above background. And that's because the green copy is going to be potentially messing with a bunch of stuff down here. So with green copy selected, we're going to go ahead and use our W tool, grab our dragon here. We're going to use our brush and brush over him, and he's actually behind our dragon here, so that's why we can't see the shadow color coming on. And now we're going to go ahead and do Control T, and then we're going to flip vertical. Now you can see it. Then we're going to go ahead and click Skew. But first we're going to drag it down here. And with our dragon down here, we're going to just start skewing this shadow to kind of follow the shape of our shadow plane here. Just gonna add him in here. Alright, so I'm gonna click Enter, and then we're gonna go ahead and down the opacity on that one too. Again, the shadow color doesn't quite mix, so we're going to go to Image Adjustments, Selective Color, and we're going to go to Blacks, and we're going to just add a little more blue to that and a little more magenta. So there we go. So if I click deselect now, this is what we've got. Now obviously we have to get rid of a little bit of this shadow, but we'll take care of that later once the image is actually flattened. For the time being, we can get rid of a little bit of it. We're going to go ahead, and now that we've got green copy, and we're going to take our eraser tool here, which is at 100%, and we're going to zoom in. What we're going to do is we're just going to get rid of the edges that we can mostly get rid of. If it's close to the edge, we'll just leave it alone and do it after the image has been flattened, because we're going to be doing some blur work, and we don't want to mess with that too much, because blur can actually change where shadows sit. So there's that, and we'll go to red copy and get rid of this stuff right here. We'll go ahead and get rid of all this stuff right there. And over here we'll just delete, let's see if we go to white copy, we'll just delete a little bit of these talons showing up right here. Okay, that's good enough for now. So now we've got our shadows, and we also have our dragons all in position. So everything we do now is just trying to make these dragons blend in and these shadows blend in as much as possible. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead up, and we're going to, before we get started on all this other grain and blur and everything else, we're going to go to the white dragon and just change its opacity a little lower, since it looks a little tiny bit dark. And same thing with the green dragon. So we'll go to green copy and down the opacity a little bit. That looks a little bit better. So with that in place, our next agenda is to get some noise over all these new objects we've put into image. Because if we zoom in on the model's face, what you'll notice is there's a little bit of grain to the image. And if we go ahead and look at one of the dragons, you're automatically going to notice there is no grain there. So to make these pieces blend into this image, we need to put a little bit of natural grain. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and start with the white dragon, go up to filter, and down to noise, and add noise. And we're just going to mess around and see what feels natural in our image. So looking at our grain, that'll be a good start, because we're going to be adding a blur to the image later, and a little bit of that grain is going to get phased out. So okay, and we're going to go ahead and do the same thing to each of the other dragons. So again, adding noise, and to our last dragon down here, the red one. And you can use that, if you go into filter, if you just use an action, you can use that little top button right there, and it should do the exact action you did before. So now that we've added grain to our dragons, we're going to go ahead and add some grain to our shadows as well. Because if you look at that main shadow, you can definitely tell that it is a lot grainier than these other ones. So there we go. We've added grain to all of our objects now. The next step is to start adding blur to them, because as you noticed, especially with the green dragon and red one, there is a massive difference between the sharpness of our dragon and our model and our image. So we're going to add some blur to make these blend in a little bit. I know it sounds counterintuitive to add blur to an object in an image, but it really can make a difference for this. So we just added a Gaussian blur to our green dragon. We're going to do the same thing to the white one, and we've used that little button up there again. And we're adding that same Gaussian blur to our red dragon. So now that's just a basic blur to get us started, but there's also some other things we can think about. So now that we've added blur to our dragons, we need to add blur to our shadows as well, especially our shadows, because if we can add some blur to those shadows, they're going to blend in with that sand and that other shadow a lot better. There we go. So adding a bit of blur to these shadows is going to help them look a little bit more ingrained with the image. But now that I'm doing these blurs, I'm noticing that I might want to turn up the opacity a bit on some of the shadows so that they blend in a bit more again. So now that we did the 2 higher dragons, we're going to go ahead and do the red dragon's shadow, and it should match up a little bit better with her shadow as far as blur goes. So if we decrease that a little bit more, get it a little closer. There we go. That looks decent. Alright, now before we move on to doing detail work with the dragons, there's one other thing we have to do with the shadows. And what we have to do is add on some light points to these wings, because if we look up here at dragons, we're seeing this light come through their wings. And what we want to do is bring that light into the shadows, because we're not going to have this solid shadow on the ground. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and go to, let's say, the white dragon's shadow to start. Take my eraser tool, let's down the opacity to about 6%. And we're just going to use the eraser tool to just softly reduce those shadows. And make sure your hardness is all the way down. So what we're doing is we're just softly adding light entry points to these wings. And that's going to make the shadows look a little more realistic. Oops, I can't affect the green one without being in the green copy, so there we go. So now we back out. The wings now look like they're actually reflecting light on the ground. Okay, now that we got those wings cleared up on the shadows, we actually have to do that to the 2 dragons we did it to, just to make them a little more transparent. This is a great thing you can do with cloth or wings in photos when you're doing manipulation like this, and it really integrates items into the shots. So we're going to about 8% with our eraser tool here, going to the wings and doing pretty much the same thing we did with the shadows, just brushing down those center sections a little tiny bit. It's not going to make a huge difference on this white dragon, but when we get to the green one, it's going to do quite a bit. Okay. So now we're moving over to the green one. We're going to switch our layers over to the green layer. And we're just doing essentially the same thing. Going to brush through those. It adds a little bit of a light section to the wings and makes them feel a little more dynamic. Okay, there's actually one other thing we can do to these dragons before we do a little bit of motion blur, and that is make sure that the sun is hitting them in the right directions, and we can add some highlights to these dragons, especially this green one. Note that the rim light on our model's hair is kind of coming in from the green dragon's direction, but when we look at the green dragon, we're not really seeing any of that rim lighting on its head or back. So we're going to just use our midtones highlight tool to just kind of dodge in some of those colors. It's amazing what you can do to objects to add color into them and add dynamicness into the shape. If something feels fake, there's a lot of things you can do to make them feel a lot more real. So now our dragon has a little more of a dynamic lighting that matches the image in it. And what we're on to now is doing some blur. So if you notice, obviously this dragon is flying, and if we really want to make it feel like it's flying, we can take its wings and add a motion blur using our motion blur filter. We go to Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur. So we're going to add this motion blur. You can use this little wheel over here to decide which direction the motion blur is coming from. Let's actually add a little bit more motion blur to this. Alright, that looks good. So now that we've added this motion blur to the whole dragon, we can actually take our history brush and just delete the motion blur over the parts of the dragon we don't want to be blurred. We've got our history brush at about 50% right now. So we can use a few strokes in areas to kind of add some of the stillness back in, but our wings now look a lot more active. Our tail is swishing through the air. It just feels a lot more dynamic. Okay, so I'm looking here and I'm still not quite pleased with how much motion blur there is. So we're going to go ahead and add some more motion blur to the wings. This time we're just going to grab a selection using our selection tool. And you can get that in the toolbar. It's the lasso tool, and there's several different options. So we're adding a lot more blur to this. And now that we have that blur, we're going to deselect, and then we're going to use our history brush and go back in time a little bit in our history and just kind of get rid of the edgings of the blur coming from the wings. And that just looks a lot more lively. Okay, so one other thing when looking at this dragon is I'm still not pleased with the amount of rim lighting we have, so we're actually going to add a little bit more. This is just kind of the process you go through with photos. You'll try things and you might decide it's just not enough yet. So that's looking a lot better. So when we back out of that, we're really going to see that from a distance. That's nice. So things are starting to look pretty good now. It's probably time to start working on color. Alright, so now that we've got all of our dragons figured out and all their shadows figured out as well, we can now start finishing up retouch and color for this image. So retouch for this image is really simple. We're not going to be doing very much here. We're literally just going to go in and we're going to go to our background and use our healing brush just to clean up a few little bumps. Then we're also going to go in and use our burn tool over here. So if you right click here on the dodge tool, you'll get the burn tool. I just want to use a little bit, just quickly add a little more definition to the eyebrow and eye for this shot. And that's looking good. That's literally all the retouch we're doing for this image. Super simple. So we're gonna zoom out here using our Control- tool. And now it's time to look at color. Oh, and there's actually one other retouch we need to do. But in order to get to these steps, we actually have to go to Layer, Flatten Image, and flatten our image for the rest of the work we do in this image. Because now we're going to be working on overall color, and we're also going to be doing some shadow work to clean up the shadow edges that we did earlier. So if we go down here, what we see is these little bumps of shadow coming into one another, and I would just want to clean those up a bit so it's a little more clear what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and click the spot heal brush and just edge some of that darkness away. We just want to get enough of it gone so that when we're looking at this image zoomed out, we're not really noticing these. You can also use your stamp tool for this, or you could also use your brush and your eyedropper tool to get rid of these. All of those methods are valid. whatever works best. I'm going to go ahead and use my eyedropper tool now. Go a little less than 100%. Make the brush a lot smaller and just kind of add some of that color in there. Let's also down our hardness quite a bit. Add some softness in there. There we go. Those shadows blend into each other a little better now. So that retouch is now done. All we really have left is color work. So we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Selective Color. In our reds, I want to add just a little bit of magenta to the image, just kind of add that pinky blush look to our model. Then we're going to go to our whites, and I'm going to add yellows and drop cyans to add in some reds and just kind of create this lush atmosphere of kind of warm light to the image, which contrasts really well with our beautiful blue shadows. So that looks good. Let's go to our blacks. I actually don't think I'm going to touch our blacks because I'm just really loving this contrast of shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. There's one other thing I'm going to do now. I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer. So we've got layer 1 now. I'm going to get a color from around here. I like these oranges to golds to yellows for adding light aura to images, and that's what we're just about to do. So I'll click OK. We're going to go ahead and select our brush. Let's put it up all the way in opacity because we can always down that later. And I'm just going to do something crazy and just brush right over our model. I'm going to add another one like right there. And then what we're going to do is go over here to opacity, and we're going to down that quite a bit. And so now what we see is we just get this extra ambiance of light surrounding our model, and that's pretty. Alright, so this is looking decently good to me. Now, one other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and we're not going to be on layer 1, and just check color balance, because sometimes you can do some fun things with this. But I'm actually going to go ahead and not use these. So I'm going to hit cancel, and I think what we're looking at here is our finished image. So there's still plenty of things people can do to make objects blend in better, but this tutorial should give you a couple of good basics to start with. And it is certainly fun to add fantasy elements like dragons into photographs. So I hope that was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions, let me know if you have any requests, and thank you for watching! Don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials, photo shoots, and dressmaking in the future.